Captain Nicole Wiswell is an engineer with the Minnesota National Guard. He, recently went viral with an Army-sponsored Pride Month video where the 32-year-old stated, quote, "As long as you show trust in your team and take care of your people, gender doesn't matter," end quote. I guess the slogan, "gender doesn't matter," has a certain ring to it. When did the Army decide that this was forward-leaning messaging? Perhaps one of the many reasons they are tens of thousands of soldiers, men, short on the recruiting side. When Major Rachel Jones cut an official video for the Army during Pride Month, it doubled the traffic of any other Army Pride Month video to date. Jones is the U.S. Army Sustainment Command Cyber Division Chief, or G6, Information Management. With his she/her pronouns proudly displayed on the desk, Major Jones wants parents to know that if they give their sons and daughters to defend the United States in the Army, a major factor in the training will be reminding them that, quote, "Diversity is our strength as a nation. And what we, trans people, have to offer in terms of diverse skill sets we bring, the diverse way of thinking we bring to the team to make everything work better," end quote. If only Eisenhower had an out-of-shape transgender officer during Operation Market Garden, we could have ended World War II before Christmas 1944. As Major Jones goes on to explain on an Army-sponsored Twitter video, he suffered major depression and had suicidal ideation before he transitioned. Jones said, quote, "The pressure of hiding all the time was so bad I grew up depressed and suicidal to the point that I always had a plan to end my life. Even when deployed, the greatest threat to my own safety was myself," end quote. Well, I think we found the soldier of the quarter. But what PT standards will he use? By the look of him, he's a 10 push-up kind of guy. You cannot maintain a security clearance in the military with suicidal ideation, let alone be the chief of a major Army cyber division. Nor should you ever be trusted to oversee subordinates if you feel you are a bigger threat to your own welfare than ISIS or Al-Qaeda. No rational soldier would ever say this aloud, let alone to the Army. I should be befuddled that the Army vetted this video, edited it, and put their name on it. But I'm not. Pride Month or not, this is a direct violation of every military standard there is. We have enough veteran suicide. Yet here is a major in the United States Army talking about contemplating suicide while on deployment, and now allegedly running a cyber shop with a full security clearance. Complete insanity. What has changed in the Army? Well, Department of Defense Instruction 1300.28 is what changed in the Army. As of April 30th, 2022, guidance was given for in-service transition for transgender service members. When I served, transition meant you were leaving the military and took a class on how to do a job interview or how to fill out your VA paperwork. Now, under Secretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, Virginia Penrod, the Pentagon has issued a step-by-step instruction book on what commanders and leaders must do to meet the needs of these very special forces. In 2016, the Obama administration conducted a study to test whether it was a good idea after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell to allow transgender soldiers to openly serve in the military. That study found that post-surgery transition soldiers would be non-deployable for 238 days, or 34 weeks. When this report was brought to then-incoming President Donald Trump's attention, he promptly banned transgender soldiers from serving. However, in 2022, Biden officials reversed the policy and issued 1300.28, which not only waived 300 days for post-op transgenders, but also allowed for DoD hospitals to cover laser hair removal, voice feminization surgery, facial and body contouring procedures, breast and chest surgery, and genital surgery. They waived grooming standards and uniform standards for transgender soldiers as well. Then they waived the standard that previously disqualified first-term elective surgery. This change to the standards meant that men and women could join the military for the express purpose of transitioning, be non-deployable for a year, and take life-altering hormone therapy that would mean they would be non-deployable unless the military could guarantee the supply of medication. You know, in some shithole country. Yes, your tax dollars pay for mentally unstable boys to become girls, chop off their body parts, then sit out of training for a year, pay for ongoing medical treatments, and demand everyone call them a new name. Man, I wish I had one of those super soldiers in my platoon in Iraq. I spoke with an Alex Gordon, that's a pseudonym, who is an active duty Army officer in the field artillery at Fort Hood, Texas. Graduating at the top of his class at West Point, he was commissioned in the past few years. Gordon got to experience the transgender shift in the Army in real time. Toward the end of his time at West Point, lecture halls became indoctrination seminars with social science professors giving mandatory briefs. White rage was not just a catchphrase. It was the basis for study and briefings pushed by West Point professors. Gordon told me, when George Floyd was killed, we had a series of seminars where only black cadets were allowed to talk. The woke agenda was not just happening at West Point, but it followed this young officer to his duty station in Texas. He said, quote, "Thursdays are leader time. I wanted to do training on radios and skill level stuff for our jobs. My boss called and said we needed to cancel training for a transgender pronoun session. I mean, this happens all the time now," end quote. Gordon's chain of command cannot question if someone in the unit wants to change their gender. He has soldiers in his unit enlisting under one sex, and then the DoD pays for them to immediately change to another gender. By the time they transition, their 3-year enlistment is up, and because they are on medical and not available for training the entire time, they hardly serve a day in the field artillery. Look out, China. Gordon continued, quote, "We have this one senior NCO, non-commissioned officer, old school, the guy you want around to train young soldiers. Has seen and done everything. He called bullshit on the bathrooms being all unisex. They forced him to apologize. When I do a briefing, I had to be super careful with pronouns, him, her, or whoever. Look, I'm a junior officer, and it's really hard. I'm literally walking on eggshells every day," end quote. Gordon says in his unit, overall readiness is in serious crisis. Enlisted at the ranks of E4, specialists, to E6, staff sergeants, no longer want to re-enlist. The top block, or best, soldiers of his unit are getting out in droves. This leaves a junior NCO hole and forces units to promote soldiers not ready for that leadership position. If this is happening in one field artillery unit, what do you think is happening all over the Army, all over the military? As crazy as it sounds, the operational tempo during Iraq and Afghanistan made it better. At least the soldiers were busy, deploying and doing their jobs. Now they stand around in garrison, getting lectured about their pronouns, and unable to enforce basic standards. Such pointless exercises are bound to generate resentment when the real-world lethality of the battlefield comes into play. Gordon continued, quote, "As far as I'm concerned, when it gets real, at war, you can't spell die without DEI. We need to do our jobs. This is life and death. And I don't think these people understand, or they simply don't care," end quote. Soldiers must tell themselves whenever lack of readiness in combat leads to terrible consequences, at least we aren't misgendering our enemies. Even as Biden's military continued to market to the LGBTQIA+, or whatever the acronym is by the time this is published, community, recruitment numbers plummeted, bordering on the realm of freefall. The military was self-evidently going woke and trying to appeal to non-traditional recruits to fill their quotas for the volunteer military. The lack of deployment-ready units, because there are not enough new recruits, was one reason why the Pentagon resorted to a non-combat call-up of the Inactive Ready Reserve, or IRR, for support in Europe in July 2023. The IRR, which I was a part of while writing this book, was not built to fill recruiting shortfalls of this magnitude. Biden's DoD is desperate. Yet, instead of trying to avoid the looming recruiting iceberg, the military hit the accelerator and pushed their engines full steam ahead. More diversity, more gender worship, more trans celebration. Recruitment continued to fall, and record numbers of enlisted soldiers decided to walk away from re-enlistments, no matter how many perks the military was offering them. Huge bonuses? No thanks. The administration and media will spin other reasons, like the economy or fitness levels of our youth. But the simple underlying reason is clear. Young people don't want to be part of an organization that doesn't share their values. Even more, an organization they no longer trust. Or worst of all, an organization that doesn't trust or want you. How else do you explain a January 2024 revelation that Army recruiting numbers of white Americans have dropped precipitously in the past 5 years? From 44,000 white kids joining the Army in 2018 to 25,000 white kids joining in 2023. A staggering 43% decrease. At the same time, non-white demographics have seen increases those 5 years. Turns out, all the diversity recruiting messages made certain kids, white kids, feel like they're not wanted. It's a long-held conservative American tradition to speak softly and walk away from organizations that offend our values. America's white sons and daughters are walking away. And who can blame them? On April Fool's Day, 2023, as part of a wildly stupid publicity campaign, Bud Light sent a package of special label cans to transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney to commemorate her 365 days of girlhood. The cans were intended to be part of a promotional sweepstakes that would give a potential winner $15,000 from Bud Light. Turns out, the only loser was Bud Light. 10 days later, Anheuser-Busch, the parent company of Bud Light, began to issue a steady stream of responses and quasi-retractions to navigate the resulting landmines to their own corporate image. Each resulting non-apology only made the problem worse. Who would have thought that Dylan Mulvaney, through his corporate deal with Bud Light, could create agreement between the patrons of Manhattan gay bars and Kid Rock? Somehow, all agree they would boycott Bud Light, whose market share plummeted by $28 billion. Anheuser-Busch was guilty of trying to find a new market by offending the values of their traditional customers. In their attempt to rebrand and move beyond frat boys, as one woke executive exclaimed, they lost their core customers, then offended those they were seeking to reach. Trying to please everyone caused them to lose everything. The military says to Bud Light, hold my beer. Joining the military is not a jobs program. It is a commitment, a passion, an act of sacrificial love. There is no draft. No one is forced to join. Those who join do so because they believe in the nation that they will be serving. Our recruits are intelligent, educated, morally upright, and good citizens. They are wise enough to know that they are giving themselves and their futures to the leadership of the United States of America. Why then are so many turning their backs on a military career. The military is paying the price for ignoring their core constituents for the sake of chasing social justice validation and non-existent customers. They're trading thousands of boys from Tennessee for a handful of trans recruits from San Francisco. People who join the military generally believe that joining provides a twofold benefit. It helps them become the people they want to become, it changes them for the better, and it does so in the service of a nation they respect. They become part of a noble tradition. We've already mourned the lack of respect shown to the history and traditions of the nation and our military. So let's focus on military recruitment. Military recruiters face a growing and persistent problem of the current generation. They want to be celebrated and praised for who they are, as if they arrive fully formed without the need for improvement and maturity. They desire to be accepted and acceptable as they see themselves, with the impetus placed on others to accept their condition, assumptions, and worldview without question. Soldiers are traditionally offered none of these incentives. They enter the military unformed. They are broken, shaped, and molded into the soldiers that they can become. They're trained to fit into the mold that the military has prepared for them, not to be themselves to the cheers of the brass. They're pushed to always be better, to never settle on being good enough, to never anticipate or expect praise, and to do the difficult work when no one is watching them. Spotlight rangers, or attention hogs, and individualists are not good recruits and will be winnowed away by boot camp and rigorous training exercises. Seeking them in recruitment drives is not only foolish, but counterproductive to the maintenance of a strong military. In this audiobook, I have said consistently that our military needs people who will protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and are willing to fight, bleed, and kill in its defense. You may ask, if that's the goal, then why not have transgenders in the military? The answers are physical, biological, and medical. There are multiple controversial debates surrounding transgenderism in the Western world. One debate surrounds the coeducational imposition of transgenders in athletics, locker rooms, and school restrooms. This debate concerns the unwanted exposure to or of naked bodies in public or private spaces and is grounded in the clash of rights between the trans person and the woman who must coexist in these traditionally safe spaces. This has to do with a right to safety and privacy in intimate moments. Another controversy regards underage trans children and body-altering procedures, therapies, and surgeries. The transition of a minor child involves issues of consent and maturity. Do children under 18 fully understand the decision that they are making? Is there a compelling reason for a society that bans those under 21 from alcohol and those under 18 from nicotine and tattoos? To abandon these common sense restrictions for procedures that are far more life-changing and permanent? It's an insane and illogical double standard, pushed by the godless left in pursuit of altering the male-female construct. While all of these might be controversial, they rate an open debate in a free society. But they only tangentially impact our discussion of transgenders in the military, because such concerns must be applied against the standard of combat readiness and efficacy. When it comes to transgenderism in the military, the shuttering of the don't ask, don't tell policies during the Obama administration effectively created a dual reality. Soldiers can do what they want sexually in their own time, and a soldier's sexual life is now open at work. Homosexuality was no longer disqualifying for a military cadet or enlisted person. So the moral and/or cultural rationale for barring transgenders collapsed. The concern with transgenderism in the military is not about the individual rights of the person or the collective rights of the unit. The concerns are based on the standards of military readiness and the likely failure of a transitioning and/or transitioned person to meet those standards. To understand why military readiness is impacted by transgenderism and transitioning, you just have to look at what the expectations of a soldier are. When a Marine or a soldier goes to basic training, the first thing they will notice, especially if you are an allergy sufferer, is that they are not allowed to use their allergy medications without authorization from the medic. For many of them in the opening days of the hot, humid, and sweltering boot camp, the lack of their normal allergy medications results in significant headaches. One might ask the question, why does boot camp restrict the soldier from using their allergy medications? Well, the same reason boot camp makes sure that the soldiers, sailors, and Marines are given military-issued glasses instead of their custom civilian eyewear. The recruit is not training for the local field hockey team or the Google soccer squad. They are being prepared for war. Military readiness means preparing the soldier for the deprivations of the combat situation. Civilian eyewear typically is not capable of withstanding the rigors of battle, nor does it easily work with the gear that the soldier must wear in the combat zones. It is not about your personal comfort or your appearance. It's about your effectiveness in the field that matters. It's the same with allergy meds. The military cannot guarantee that you will have your medication when you're on field assignment, nor can they assume that your brand of nasal spray will not interact with the jabs, meds, and toxins that you will be exposed to in a combat zone. The goal is to minimize the risks and needs of the combat troops in the field. The more they are dependent upon, the less combat ready they become. If you're fighting for days at a time, or in a submarine or on a flight deck, the issue must become, can you endure it if you lose access to the medications that you need? Before deploying to combat, I very much remember the dental exams. Seemed odd at the time, but makes sense now. There was a category level for dentistry that deployed soldiers must meet. A Category 4 or Cat 4 was someone who needed surgery, a root canal, or filling. If those procedures were not completed by a certain day, the tooth was simply pulled. That was the only way you could end up deploying with your unit. Why is that? The Army did not want a toothache in the desert, where dentists were in short supply. Any issue had to be removed for the betterment of the mission. I deployed with many soldiers who just had teeth pulled, usually with not enough anesthesia. The mission always comes first. One of the realities of a transgender person is that they are dependent on medications and hormones to live as the gender that they have chosen. They are non-deployable for almost a year after transition. It is not as simple as having surgery and going on with your life. Transgender people must maintain a regular regimen of medication, or their hormones will re-regulate to the natural birth standards. It takes a lot of medication to manage self-mutilation. No team should want someone who puts themselves above the organization. You do not want someone already burdened by the rigors and stress of a combat situation that also may be experiencing a hormonal shift. Our hormones regulate our emotions and have a link to our behaviors. You can't be in a combat situation and be forced to address the lack of medication that changes your behavior, attitudes, or capabilities in the field. More importantly, your fellow soldiers shouldn't have to deal with it. When bullets fly, and they will, that's what matters. Another Army senior NCO weighed in for me, saying, quote, "Every time we get our biannual extremism training or transgender in your formation training, I don't know a single person who doesn't roll their eyes and say, 'What the fuck are we doing?'" End quote. We all roll our eyes, but the policy continues, and it consumes the unit. To be blunt, the real military doesn't care about your pronouns or any other customized communication concerns you may have. Your squad and company couldn't care less about these things. The offenses that our combat soldiers experience every day on the battlefield are the true and critical test of human endurance. As each soldier, sailor, and Marine is put through the test of boot camp, many are demeaned and criticized by drill sergeants to toughen them up and prepare them for things that are much more damaging to the body, mind, and spirit. If a soldier falls apart because they are called by the wrong pronoun, then they are not mentally strong enough to endure the rigors of combat. If they are not, then they have no business being in a combat-ready military force. You cannot care about an individual when the collective, the interlocking parts of a smooth, steady, yet complex military machine, is in the balance. Let me be abundantly clear. Like my old platoon sergeant used to say to our guys, quote, "Sorry if mom and dad never told you this at home," end quote. For the most part, the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, the Navy, and the Coast Guard have no issue with what guys legally do on their own time within the guidelines of the chain of command. When it encroaches upon the function and mission of the unit, it cannot be allowed. It must be removed for the betterment of the team. Americans have been trained to believe that our sexual choices are private and unassailable. This, of course, is a relatively recent innovation, but one that I am not averse to acknowledging, mostly. What you wish to do in the privacy of your own home and on your own time is yours. But once you freely joined the United States military, you've surrendered your time, your body, and your privacy. It's not about you, it's about us. You are no longer your own person. The lives of your brothers are in your hands. The sake of our nation hangs in the balance. You are a part of the most disciplined and lethal force in human history. That was why you sport the bad haircut. That's why you must wear a uniform. That's why you aren't allowed to have facial hair like you did during your summer abroad. That's why you wear the uncomfortable boots. That's why you might miss the birth of your son or the wedding of your sister. That is why the patch on your shoulder is the flag of the United States of America. The same flag that stands for American pride, not gay or trans pride. The military does not care if you look better in fall colors, because you surrender your individuality to be a part of an organization that must stand for something bigger than any one person or ideology. In the military, we are not white or brown. We are not Methodists or Mormons. We are not homosexual or heterosexual. We are just Americans. Dedicated, disciplined, lethal Americans. Anything that distracts from the objectives of mission success must be surrendered for the sake of the nation. The rules and conditions of the military were established well before our grandparents joined. Wisdom of wars past forged our combat standards. Our responsibility, like theirs, is to comply and have courage. Small improvements are made, equipment improves, but the oath never does. All of this might seem mean to those who have lived civilian lives with civilian privileges. If you lose an arm at the plant, you will sue the company and likely win big. If you lose a limb in the Army, it is a part of your service. Talk to someone who's lost a limb for the country. Talk to someone who's lost a brother or sister in battle. If you are not willing to lay down your life or a limb for the sake of a bigger cause, then you really should look at another career. If you want to dress in drag and be affirmed, then move to San Francisco. But our American military has no business falsely advertising anything that is contrary to its warfighting ethos, regardless of their recruitment goals or political expectations. For the recruits, for the military, and primarily for the security of the country, transgender people should never be allowed to serve. It's that simple. Chapter 5. The Deadly Obsession with Women Warriors. It was the biggest movie of 2022. Steven Spielberg gushed that it saved Hollywood's ass after COVID restrictions had driven Americans to stay home and stream old favorites. He probably thought its success was based on simple nostalgia. But what was it about Top Gun Maverick that sent people streaming back to theaters? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't just spectacle, it was something deeper. It was the fact that this was a story about how America, Americans, brave men, normal men, and heroism were all good things. It was a breath of fresh air. In the sequel to the original feel-good American hype movie, Tom Cruise's ace pilot Maverick Mitchell starts off as the embodiment of modern American ennui. Paralyzed by guilt over past mistakes, he stalled in his career, refusing to be the leader the military needs. What if he makes a mistake and gets someone else hurt? When a crisis comes along, he drags his feet, unwilling to step up to take responsibility. Ultimately, he is forced to learn that he needs to stop overprotecting his soldiers. A good dad doesn't swaddle his kids in bubble wrap or keep them on the bench. He empowers them. He lets them go hard on their own and promises to always have their back. That spirit of risk and honor is the only thing that can neutralize the threat. The movie is a giant depiction of a hero arguing with a safety-obsessed careerist bureaucracy to get a tough job done in a way that won't needlessly sacrifice the young people in his command. Can you imagine the stream of new recruits our military would see if that was our ethos, front and center? The Army has a safety problem, which is only getting worse. It's not that today's wokesters created an obsession with safety, but they have exacerbated it. By definition, what the military does is not safe. Kill or be killed, destroy or be destroyed, not exactly safe. Understandably, the military over the years has worked hard to make training safer to minimize casualties and injuries. And despite highly publicized recent training accidents, the military overall does a pretty good job keeping troops safe when they train. But if you talk to guys still serving, and I talked to many for this audiobook, they will point out that a big reason for fewer training accidents is less training. More time than ever is being spent on social justice PowerPoint moralizing, and meeting those metrics in today's military is the most important standard to meet. One former Army battalion commander told me, quote, "The Army doesn't give a shit about training anymore. Instead, how long can Private Snuffy grow his beard before we can kick him out?" End quote. A Marine Corps enlisted veteran told me, quote, "In our force, it is impossible to do all the nonsense training and also maintain our gunnery standards or vehicle maintenance training. You are naturally going to have to sacrifice training to do your political re-education bullshit. There is only a finite amount of time." End quote. Another colonel still heavily involved in unit training said, quote, "The Army trans PowerPoint training sucks. If you try to get into a conversation, they shut you down. I had 2 NCOs that were disgusted by the training. I tell them how I feel candidly, but nothing changes. There are 3 people in a command of 1,000 who identify as trans. And we do the day-long training every 6 months for 0.3% of our unit." End quote. Another mid-level Army officer told me after conducting this very training himself for weeks on end, quote, "I was getting phone calls from a senior officer saying, 'I'm tracking these 10 dudes didn't do the brief. Get it done.' My senior officers were all over me like hawks on the trans shit in ways they never do for real warfighting tasks. It all just means we keep people in the classroom longer than we need to. And real training just gets delayed or never happens." End quote. These are just a few direct quotes, and I could go on, unit by unit, day by day. And it's not just junior enlisted or senior enlisted, junior officers or senior officers. It's across the military, and it has become an obsession. Every unit knows that social justice, trans, gender, woke training is the top priority. Not doing this training, or not doing it properly, will get a commander or junior leader fired. Not doing real field training becomes secondary. They say it is to make people feel safe. But everybody knows, even the people mandating this training, that when the bullets start flying, this approach is going to make everyone less safe. Ultimately, this type of approach is not the fault of the troops. It is the fault of the general class. Much like the brass that show up in Top Gun Maverick, today's highest-ranking military leaders are simultaneously negligent about protecting soldiers on the battlefield and absurdly safety-conscious in training, a small-minded approach that erodes readiness in the long run. They have bought into this feedback loop, so military leaders focus on becoming efficient bureaucrats, not honorable warriors. Which takes us back to the problem of careerism. The generals serving under Obama and now Biden know that far left-wing social justice crap is coming down the pike. It's their job to stand up to it, resign, or as most of them have done, just give in to it. Going along gets these generals along, and their careers continue. And then when they retire, they get to sit at the defense contractor cool kids table. All the colonels I know who were real warfighters, who would never cave to this stuff, have long since been pushed out of the military. The social justice, safety obsessed keep getting promoted, which, again, makes all the troops less safe. Safety is not what built America. Grit built America. Toughness built America. Taking risks built America. And right now, our military leadership does not embody any of those things. America sent men to the moon in a spaceship that had a fraction of the technology of my iPhone. Where are such men today? They're not wearing camouflage with stars on their shoulder. That's for sure. I'm going to say something politically incorrect that is a perfectly commonsensical observation. Dads push us to take risks. Moms put the training wheels on our bike. We need moms, but not in the military, especially in combat units. It's not that individual women can't be courageous, ambitious, and honorable. I know many phenomenal female soldiers. The problem is that the left needs every woman to be as successful as every man. So they've redefined success in a counterproductive way. The left doesn't praise the exceptional woman who demonstrates martial qualities, but rather redefines the goals we need in the military to be more conducive to female success. The problem is that a more empathetic and effeminate